The afternoon Johannesburg air tasted of summer, ripe, dusty, alive with sweat and laughter. It should have smelled of promise, not humiliation. But I remember that day beginning not with hope, but with a silence so dense it felt like kneeling in thick, unbroken clay, my breath muffled by my own skin. We sat in stackable plastic chairs, a rainbow of manufactured colors, arranged under the great oak that watched over our neighborhood secondary school. The headmaster cleared his throat so everyone would listen. He nodded at me, and trembling I stepped up to the rickety podium. I'd practiced my speech for weeks, words about dreams and growth, gratitude and the future. I'd ironed my shirt until the sleeves gave sharp lines against my wrists. Just before me, Tebogo had spoken about engineering. The crowd had clapped loudly, his mother whistled. I gripped the podium and tried to smile, the paper with my notes sweat slick in my shaking hands. My name is Karabo Ndilavu, I started, voice not as meek as I'd feared. Today, I want to thank my teachers and family for believing in me, because I have a dream. Not a lawyer, not a doctor, I meant to say. I want to be a pastry chef. Those words never left my mouth. An uncle, my mother's eldest brother, Sabizo, heavyset and sharp-eyed, burst out laughing from the third row. A baker, Karabo. You mean a real man wants to play with cakes? A ripple, quiet at first, then swelling, spread through the crowd. My cousin Sizwe craned his neck and grinned at the others. A few of my classmates shifted in their seats. The word chef stuck in my windpipe. My mother, seated near the back, pinched her lips tight and looked away. My father crossed one leg over the other and studied the ground, silent as he always was when the family was uncomfortable. Someone called, "You'll make a nice bride, Karabo." That laughter was sharp like glass splinters on pavement. The speech left my hands, fluttered to the ground unread. The headmaster stepped forward, a stiff smile plugging the wound. "Thank you, Karabo. Our next speaker is Busey." And just like that, the moment was gone. I walked back to my chair, face burning, ears hissing with the weight of being ridiculed, like I'd tried to conjure a fifth season, something absurd, naive. I sat through the rest of the ceremony, the applause for everyone else ringing hollow as pebbles dropped in a metal bucket. When it ended, my family grouped around me like storm clouds. I half listened as Thabizo clapped my shoulder, shaking his head. "At least your hands will always smell sweet, nephew." His laughter rusted in my ear. That night the silence at home was form-fitting. My mother cooked curry and rice. My younger sister, Kibetsui, brought her plate to her bedroom. We ate in the narrow kitchen, the refrigerator humming like a prayer. I wanted to speak to defend myself, but the words felt old and tired, worn thin by 1,000 tiny dismissals. Instead, I swallowed my dinner and went to bed early. Resolve began as anger, then cooled into insistence. If they would mock me for dreaming, then I would dream alone. I started small. For 2 years, I washed dishes at a bakery in Maboneng. The air inside was always thick with sugar and yeast, rich in a way that clung to your clothes. I woke before sunrise, the city still blue-black and half asleep, and took the taxi into town. Nobody at home asked where I went or why I came home smelling like cinnamon and burnt caramel. For months, I kept my eyes down and my mouth closed. I became invisible, ignored by everyone except the scrawny cats that patrolled the alley behind the shop. They were faithful, at least, always hovering for scraps. One morning, the pastry chef, Madame Lefevre, white hair in a bun, face marked by lines of old laughter, said, "Karabo, wash your hands and come here." I did as told, stomach roiling with nerves. She placed a rolling pin in my palm, set a ball of dough before me. "Have you ever made croissants?" she asked. "No, madame," I replied. She smiled, a rare flicker of encouragement. "Then today you learns." She stood beside me, slow and patient, showing how to fold the dough, how to trap butter between layers. I had to fight my hands, they trembled, clumsy, every movement feeling like a betrayal. But that first taste, ripping apart a golden, flaky croissant, steam unfurling into my face, felt like cracking open a new piece of myself. Days blurred together, early mornings, endless rolling, portioning, proofing, baking. Eventually, my wrists grew strong, my movements firm. We made eclairs filled thick with vanilla, tarts with berries from the market, layered cakes so delicate you had to hold your breath to slice them. I learned to watch the ovens, how caramelized sugar could tilt suddenly from gold to bitter brown. I kept quiet about my dreams to everyone but the dough. My family stopped asking what I did all day. Sometimes when my mother glanced at my work-stained hands, she only sighed and shook her head. 3 years passed. My life shrank to flour and butter and dawns, and to the hard, satisfying ache of being necessary. But I wanted more. One night while washing mixing bowls after closing, Madame Lefevre said, "You have talent, Carabo, you need more than this back room. Apply to the Culinary Institute." I laughed, a bitter, tired thing. But she pressed an envelope into my palm. Inside, a form half-filled and a check for a deposit. "Dream," she insisted, "even if people find it ridiculous." With her help, I applied to the Johannesburg Culinary Institute. My acceptance letter arrived quietly but changed everything. I left the bakery with a heavy heart and new hope blooming in my chest. Classes were nothing like the workroom at Maboneng, sharper, colder, louder. I was the only student from a township school. The others had grown up dining on imported pastries and taking holidays abroad. I worked doubly hard, driven by the memory of that laughter under the oak. Every challenge, every mistake felt like a personal battle. I failed at sugar sculpture. My first attempt collapsed, shards stuck like teeth in the icing. I burned a batch of lemon tarts that should have been for the dean's dinner. Each failure pressed my pride into thinner and thinner sheets, but I never quit. I took extra shifts at a nearby cafe, sleeping little. There wasn't enough money for rent and groceries, so I lived on baguette ends and overripe fruit. I called home less and less, and when I did, my mother mostly asked after kibetsui. My father said little as ever. During the final exam, an elaborate patisserie table for visiting chefs, I woke shivering. I baked through fever, hands trembling, throat raw. When I dragged my showpiece through the examination hall, some judges looked uncertain, but one, a famous chef from Paris, paused and tasted my citrus mousse. He whispered something to the others, eyes lighting up, and I knew for the first time that what I'd done mattered. I finished at the top of my class. Still, the world outside waited unimpressed. For another year, I worked in a big hotel kitchen, but the chef there called me boy and kept me scraping pans while others decorated cakes for international guests. I kept at it, saving every rand, watching, learning. My plan kept me breathing. Then, during an industry showcase, I entered a competition for young African pastry chefs. I spent every evening in the rental kitchen, testing recipes, failing, starting again. My creation, a deconstructed malva pudding with rooibos gel and amasi ice cream, was strange and beautiful. To the judges, apparently it was unforgettable. First prize. A grant to study in Lyon, France, 6 months at a legendary patisserie. I didn't sleep the night after the announcement, instead walking through the quiet pulse of downtown, city lights flickering around me like distant promises. Lyon was colder than I'd imagined, the winter wind scraping my cheeks. I wrote letters home, never mentioning the difficult parts, the homesickness, how my accent set me apart. How the French chef, skeptical at first, made me repeat myself, smiled tight when I explained where I came from. But once my work spoke for itself, the doors cracked open. Recipes that had been secrets became lessons. Techniques I'd only seen in books shifted under my hands: featherlight meringues, spun sugar cages, bitter cocoa under finely laid gold leaf. I wrote recipes in a battered notebook, thinking of my mother's kitchen with its fraying towels and burnt kettle. When the internship ended, I carried home a tiny suitcase but something heavier in my heart. My mentor in Lyon connected me to a Johannesburg restaurant looking for a new head pastry chef, a place with an open-plan kitchen and airy windows. "You have outgrown shadows," she said. I became the youngest pastry chef in the city's food district, building a menu that merged French rigor with the tastes of my childhood cafe, cooksisters perfumed with orange blossom, tartlets filled with guava and sour cream, chocolate eclairs dusted with dried naki peel. Business grew, the bloggers came. A glossy magazine called our bakery one of the best in Gauteng. In a moment of legless courage, I bought a shopfront in my old neighborhood. I called it Carabo's Table. That first morning of business, I stood at the wide glass window, watching the sun edge over the shops and trees I'd walked past for years. My staff, 2 young women from the local high school, nervous but bright, checked the ovens, set trays out, nervously eyeing the line gathering outside. I remembered the oak tree, the laughter, the heat of shame. When Thabiso arrived with 2 aunts in tow, they stood before the big glass display. My chest tightened. My mother followed a minute later, straight from work, dressed in her church skirt. My father hung back, peering through reading glasses, but he came. They all stared at the thick gold sign above the window. Inside, I nodded to the girls behind the counter. We'd baked extra malva puddings, peanut brittle shortbread, berry tarts, and my now famous rooibos cream eclairs. The scents filled the air, swirling with voices and the hum of the espresso machine. Thabiso sauntered to the counter, loud as always. "You have grown too big for my old kitchen, Carabo," he teased, but there was a tremor at the edge of his voice. "Try the lemon tart, uncle," I said, steady but unsure. My heart banged like a drum, but my hands were steady. He took a cautious bite, lips pursed. He chewed thoughtfully, tasting. It was then the rest of the relatives arrived, the same family who had laughed all those years ago, and more still, faces from the neighborhood, old school teachers, even my childhood friend Lorato. Word had spread. They packed the small cafe, eyes scanning the walls on which hung a magazine cover with my name. A hush grew as Thabiso chewed, even the espresso machine stilled. He swallowed, then took another, larger bite, my aunts murmured. My mother laid her hand over her mouth, eyes filling with tears. A reporter from a local magazine stood at the door, her camera flashing. She called, "Karabo, stand with your family," and so I did. My father smiled in a way I'd never seen before, small, proud. Thabiso turned for all to hear, raised his voice as if blessing an assembly. "Nephew, I was wrong. This is not just sugar and flour. This is art." People clapped, my family, my neighbors, the old teacher who taught me to read. Some of the laughter this time was tender, almost healing. My mother cupped my face in the crowd and whispered, "I am proud of you, Karabo. I am sorry I ever doubted." I nodded, swallowing tears, tasting that moment as surely as sugar on my tongue. That evening, after closing, I stood at the window, watching the neighborhood dim into shadow. My sister wandered in, snagged a croissant, grinned at me with the same wide smile she'd had when we were children. "You did it, Karabo." I thought about the journey, from that cut-short graduation speech to this light-filled bakery. About the years of silence and struggle, the invisible work when nobody cared, the laughter that should have broken me but only made me stronger. I realized then, redemption doesn't come in one victorious moment, but in many small, daily acts of faith, in the folding of dough, the rising of bread, the quiet persistence of believing in something that others can only call ridiculous until it's proven real. Here in my own shop among my people, I'd returned not to be crowned or to gloat, but to share what I'd built. And with each batch, each smile, each customer who tasted and came back for more, the laughter from that old graduation faded, replaced by something softer, sweeter, a silence at last filled with resolve fulfilled.